Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving straight into a wild story about a high-stakes chase across the stormy Atlantic. It's a heck of a tale involving oil, sheer power, and what one analysis suggests is a massive shift in how the world actually works. Okay, so picture this. You've got a single oil tanker all alone, and it's running from some of the most powerful naval forces on the planet. It sounds like something straight out of a movie, right? But the source material we're digging into says this was a very real event, and it's just the tip of a much, much larger iceberg. And this timeline, wow, it lays out a sequence of events that is just nuts. The analysis describes this weeks-long pursuit that kicked off near Venezuela. A sanctioned ship, called the Bella 1 at the time, just refused to stop and made a run for it. It fled into the seriously rough waters of the North Atlantic, and then things got even crazier. Russia apparently sent a submarine to protect it. The whole thing ended in this daring raid near Iceland, with US and UK forces literally dropping onto the ship from helicopters to seize it, right before Russian warships to get there.
Yeah, that is the billion-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, why all this fuss over one single ship? To get why this sparked such a huge international incident, we've got to rewind the clock just a few days and look at what lit the fuse.
So to really understand this chase, the source material tells us to look away from the ocean for a minute and turn our eyes toward Caracas, Venezuela, because the real catalyst, it argues, was a major U.S. military operation that went down just days before this chase even started. And here's where the analysis drops an absolute bombshell. It claims that in a complete surprise operation, the U.S. military arrested President Maduro. I mean, just think about that. This is framed as the moment the U.S. basically kicked in the door and announced, we're running the show in Venezuela now. A massive, massive move with immediate follow-up. So, right after the arrest, what happens next? A huge announcement. Venezuela's new government would be handing over 30 to 50 million barrels of oil to the United States. They called it a one-time transfer, but wow. The sheer scale of that is just staggering. So, to put that number into perspective, we need to look at the market. At the time all this was happening, a single barrel of oil was going for roughly $56. You do the math, and suddenly you're talking about a total value somewhere between $1.7 and $2.8 billion. And the way the source frames this is just fascinating. It's like the U.S. didn't just arrest Maduro and flex its muscles, it basically handed Venezuela the bill for the whole military operation and then paid itself directly from their oil reserves. And just like that, the stage was set for a showdown. The U.S. didn't just grab control of the oil on land, it made a huge declaration that it would control it on the seas too. No permission from them, no moving Venezuelan oil. Period. And that put them on a direct collision course with anyone who dared to test those new rules. So you make a big declaration like that, but how do you actually enforce it? I mean, the ocean's a pretty big place. Well, this is where the source dives into a strategy of the carrot, the stick, and of course, some very dramatic seizures. This is where you see just how desperate that fleeing tanker was. It was accused of being part of a shadow fleet, this network of off-the-books ships that move sanctioned stuff like black market oil. So to get away, the crew did something truly wild. They literally painted a Russian flag on the side of the ship mid-chase and changed its name to Marinara to try and claim Russian protection. But the U.S. just called their bluff, declared the ship stateless, and took it anyway. And this part just shows you the real scope of the whole operation. Get this, on the exact same day as the very public chase for the Marinara, which was empty by the way, the U.S. also quietly seized a totally different tanker, the Sofia. This one was running dark with its tracker off and was loaded with almost 2 million barrels of Venezuelan crude. So you have one seizure for the headlines, a big symbolic victory, and another for the bank. So this really spells out the whole two-pronged strategy. The source calls it a classic carrot and stick approach. The stick? That's obvious. Try to move oil without our say-so, and we will hunt you down and take your ship. But there was also a carrot, a big one. Cooperate, play by our new rules, and we'll start rolling back some sanctions, letting you sell your oil legally on the open market. And you better believe this strategy had an immediate effect. The markets heard one thing loud and clear. A whole lot more Venezuelan oil might be hitting the legal market soon. Just the possibility of that was enough to make global oil prices take a little dip. You can see how geopolitics moves markets right here. Global oil stocks fall, U.S. stocks rise. It's a perfect signal of how a chase in the Atlantic can directly move billions of dollars.
All right, so this is where we need to zoom out. Because according to the analysis we're looking at, this story is about way more than just one country's oil or a single tanker chase. This whole event is being read as a sign of a fundamental change in the way the world works. The source argues this event is a perfect illustration of a pretty harsh reality, and it's summed up perfectly by this quote. It's about a shift away from a world supposedly governed by international laws and agreements to a world where, really, the most powerful player just enforces their will. The source uses a pretty simple analogy to explain it. Imagine the strongest person on your block suddenly stands up and declares, "You know what? Forget the old rulebook. From now on, I decide what's legal around here." The argument is that this is exactly what's happening in global politics. It's a shift from enforcing an old system to just enforcing raw power and making up new rules as you go.
And not surprisingly, the analysis says this whole thing sent shockwaves through the rest of the world. Russia is furious, China is watching this whole thing very, very closely, and the rest of the world, they're just plain nervous. Because when you've got warships chasing oil tankers across the ocean, it really feels like we're sailing into a much more aggressive and unpredictable era of global politics. So in the end, the source leaves us with this really provocative question. It suggests that this one chase out in the vast, stormy North Atlantic was more than just seizing a ship. It was America's definitive, unspoken answer to that exact question. The answer? We do. And, well, that's a thought that changes the entire global game.